Right now, I want to welcome from the South Texas College of Law in Houston, Texas, Professor Josh Blackman is with us on Twitter at Josh M. Blackman. Professor, how are you, sir?
How are you doing today?
I am excellent. I appreciate you coming on the program, and I promise you'll actually get a chance to talk this afternoon. So you were
No
recently
protesters. Yeah.
invited up to City University, New York. Federalist Society invited you up there, and as you write on your blog, a couple of weeks out, you got word that there were going to be some students protesting, so you decided you were going to not talk about the original subject of originalism, but instead talk about free speech. And then when you got there, it sounds like these students didn't want you to give your speech on free speech.
Well, Cam, thanks for having me on. I speak at law schools across the country on a wide range of topics, and one of my most common speeches is about the importance of free speech on campus. I was invited to the CUNY Law School in Queens to give this talk. When I arrived on campus, I learned that there was a protest brewing against me, and they actually were considering my safety. I spoke with a security officer, and he asked me what my exit strategy was, so how I would leave the building in the event of an emergency. I'd never considered that before, but now I start to think about that. If you play the video, I walked down the hallway. There were about 40 or 50 protesters who were heckling me, shouting at me. I go into the classroom. Now, I don't mind the protest in the hallway. That's their right to speak as they wish. But the problem was once I started engaging in my talk, they were shouting me down. They were booing. They were hissing. They were shouting at me. And it made it very difficult for me to speak. I was able to basically wait 5 or 6 minutes. Eventually, they left the room. But for the first few bits, I wasn't able to get my message out, and it was quite disconcerting.
To the point that I mean, we just saw a sign there that I think is indicative of this attitude. Conservative hate does not equal intellectual debate. Before even hearing you, and it should be noted, by the way, that a couple of the tweets that were sent out ahead of time encouraging students to protest didn't even get your name right. Right? You were Justin Blackman, not Josh Blackman. So they didn't know anything about you. They hadn't heard a word that you had said, but they had already determined that what you were and what you were going to say was going to be full of conservative hate and therefore wasn't worthy of debate. That there was some sort of moral imperative to stop you from talking, even though they didn't know what on earth you were going to say.
You know, Cam, this is very strange. I have never been protested in my life. I had no idea this was even coming until the students told me. And a lot of the people who were protesting thought I was baiting them, that I was trolling them, that I came to get a reaction out of them as if I knew what they would do, which is far from the truth. I wanted to engage in a frank discussion on the importance of free speech. The protesters had no interest in engaging in that discussion. The upshot is, after the protesters finally left, I had an hour-long discussion with the people who remained in the room. And it was a good discussion. They asked me some really hard questions, and I gave them some really tough answers. But there was a discourse. The majority, though, those who were shouting at me, heckling me, wouldn't let me speak, they really didn't comport themselves well. As law students in particular, it really troubles me.
Well, as law students, there was one point where you brought up the law because you're trying to actually engage with some of what it was that you had heard, and you described this crowd of protesters who are, I guess, some of them anyway, law students shouting, "Bleep the law."
F the law. Yeah.
Which raises the question, yeah. If that's your attitude, why are you spending your time in law school?
It was bizarre. I was talking about DACA, the Deferred Action Program, and talking about the law behind it. And some students shout out, F the law. And I was like, whoa, that's a bizarre thing for a law student to say. This is your response when arguing about legal precedent. You're going to say F the law. Are you going to say that in court? Put that in a brief one day. Mr. Chief Justice, may it please the court, F the law. It's a bizarre thing. And these are our future lawyers. And Cam, listen, today's lawyers are tomorrow's judges. And when these people become judges, our freedoms are very much at risk. I'm very concerned about the future if these sorts of people wind up on the bench.
We chuckle about that, but you're absolutely right. That's the very serious concern here, is that, these young men and women are going to take these attitudes. They're not maybe going to learn anything in law school because they think they already know everything. Again, they knew exactly what you were going to say before you opened your mouth. And they'll take those attitudes with them, as you say, onto the bench. What does that do with the idea of precedent, right? If you've got folks who think that they know everything and that everybody that's come before them is not nearly as smart or as wise or as morally correct as they are, well, why would you even stand on precedent? Why wouldn't you go out and create new law?
Well, At the present moment, the judges are the baby boom generation. These are people who came of age in the 60s where free speech protected the left. Unfortunately, today it's the conservatives who need to rally behind free speech and liberals who are becoming increasingly intolerant of those they oppose. I hope this is a minority. I hope that people at CUNY don't represent the vast majority of views. But to the extent that more and more people behave in this fashion, our basic freedoms are really at risk.
There was one part of that incident that you described on your blog where there was an administrator that came into the room and basically chastised these students, said, I'll remind you what the rules are, and basically don't make me come back here again. Figure this out. Let the professor speak. And you said that some of these students complained about the way that they were treated, as if they were being treated like children, without that recognition that they were behaving like children.
Yeah, I felt like I was in like a kindergarten where the teacher was yelling at the kids, "Make sure you behave, or else you won't get your cookies." Right? And here we were, and this administrator came in. She scolded them, and they continued to yell and berate her, and they shouted back at her. As far as I know, there was no discipline imposed on the students. A couple minutes after the administrator left, the students stormed out, and they went to the dean's office to complain that they let me on campus. Once the protesters left, everything was fine. I had a good discussion. I engaged with debate. But this group of people was not interested in discourse. Once I tried to ask them questions to engage them, that's when they stormed off.
Talking again with Josh Blackman, professor at South Texas College of Law, Houston, about his recent trip to City University of New York, a law school in Queens. And you do say that after they left, you were able to have a good conversation. And as a matter of fact, I thought it was interesting. You say that there were about 5 students, only about 5 students there in the classroom when these protesters left. But by the end of your talk, you said there were about 30 students, and some of them actually said, "Yeah, I stayed away because I didn't want to get yelled at." Basically, I was afraid of what would happen to me if I did show up, so I didn't.
Yeah, Cam, they were afraid of being shamed. A couple students came up afterwards and told me that they were legitimately afraid of being shamed by their fellow students for entering the room. They came in later in the day. In fact, towards the beginning of the video, one student saying, "You still have time to leave. Why are you here? Why are you supporting this white supremacist?" That's what they called me. And these kids were just trying to ask questions, and I answered every question they put to me. I was there for an hour and change. This is not a healthy environment for academic discourse if people are afraid to even sit in on a lecture. This is a very sad state of affairs.
Absolutely. Well, listen, I hope that your next event is going to go smoother than this one, and that there won't be any protests. But you say that you're concerned about where we're going here. I'm curious. Have you seen this play out on your campus at all?
No, no, Cam, I actually played this clip for my constitutional law students this morning. They were laughing their butts off. They couldn't believe these students were making fools of themselves, my students. So, thankfully, at the South Texas College of Law Houston, we have a good culture of respect for people we agree with and people we disagree with. I've never seen this before.
So, how widespread do you think this issue is?
I think it's still at the fringe, it's at the periphery. But I suspect what happened at CUNY, a lot of people agree with, but they haven't quite gotten there yet. I'm a young guy. I've been recently tenured. I plan to do this for decades to come. And I sincerely fear that this sort of movement will spread and spread and spread. But I'll keep speaking.
Well, I appreciate that. And any advice, for Federalist Society members on campus or other students in terms of combating this? I mean, how do students, much less faculty like yourself, how do you fight back against this a culture that wants to now stifle freedom of expression? Do you just exercise your freedom? Is that the best way to do it?
So if you're at a public institution and the administration tells you you can't accept certain guests, then you can turn to the courts. These are public institutions. They accept taxpayer dollars. They're bound by the First Amendment, and they can't engage in viewpoint discrimination for student speeches. If it's a private institution, it's a lot harder because they're not bound by the First Amendment. But the students should still push for a strong, robust discourse on campus to be able to invite speakers who are outside the mainstream and can challenge those on campus to think differently.
All right, Professor, listen, thank you so much for your time, sir. It's great talking with you today.
Thanks, Cam.
You bet. Hope we get a chance to do this again soon. Josh Blackman joins us again, law professor at South Texas College of Law, Houston, on Twitter at Josh M. Blackman. And I believe we've tweeted out a story about Josh's trip to City University, New York Law there.